Survive Escape from Atlantis is the classic game of survival at all costs from designer Julian Cortland Smith, and it's currently published by Stronghold Games.
In Survive, 2 to 4 players work to get their meeples off the sinking island of Atlantis safely. It plays out in about an hour, and it's worth noting that the current 30th anniversary edition doesn't include the Dolphin and Dive Dice expansions that were present in the earlier versions.
So each player begins Survive with a set of 10 meeples, each of which has a number printed on its underside. And they also get 2 boats. You're going to build the island by randomly laying out tiles in the center of the map, and then players take turns putting their meeples on island spaces one at a time. Now this is the only point in the game at which you get to look at that number on the bottom of each of your meeples. Once those are done, the boats are laid out in turn as well, and the sea serpents go on their starting spaces, and then the game begins.
The goal of Survive is to get as many of your meeples as possible to safety on the coastlines at the edges of the board. You get points for each meeple, dependent on the number which is written on the bottom. The winner is the player at the end with the most points.
Each turn in Survive has 4 phases: playing a tile, movement, removing a tile, and moving creatures. So a player can start their turn by playing a red-edged tile from their hand, which might allow them to move a swimmer or a boat extra spaces, or move one of the creatures across the map.
Next, a player can move their meeples and their boats a total of 3 spaces. Once a meeple leaves the island, whether that's by entering the water or by getting on a boat, that meeple can't go back to the island. If there's a meeple in the water, that meeple is a swimmer, and they can only move 1 space per turn. Entering or leaving the water counts as that meeple's single movement, and a meeple can only enter a boat which is on the same sea space as he is.
Now any player can move an empty boat, while an occupied boat can only be moved by the player who's got a majority of meeples in it, or by anybody in the boat if there's a tie. No 2 boats can occupy the same sea space.
After moving, the active player removes one of the tiles from the island. Beach spaces are removed before forest spaces, which are removed before mountain spaces. A tile which is on a coastline is going to be removed before a tile that's landlocked. Any meeple which is sitting on a tile that's removed is dumped into the water and becomes a swimmer.
So all of the tiles have an image on their underside. A tile with a green border is immediately triggered and is going to make a shark, a whale, or a boat appear in its space, or might create a whirlpool which destroys anything in its own and adjacent sea spaces. A red-edged tile is going to go into your hand, and it can get played on later turns.
Finally, the active player rolls the creature die and moves the appropriate creature a number of spaces. Sea serpents move 1 space and destroy boats and meeples in that space. Sharks move 2 spaces and eat swimmers. Whales move 3 spaces and destroy boats, and they dump anybody who's in that boat into the water and they become swimmers. If you have an interrupt card in your hand, which is a tile with a red X on it, then you can play that tile to interrupt a creature's movement before it can attack your meeples or your boats.
After the creature die has been resolved, it becomes the next player's turn. The game ends when the volcano tile is revealed, and this volcano immediately erupts and destroys the island as well as any meeples that haven't made it to safety yet. Then you add up the values of the meeples that have been rescued, and the player with the most points wins.
So Survive has a really nice mix of tactics and strategy that's mostly based around the fact that each of your meeples has a value on the bottom. So that's really going to control who you want to save first, how you're going to move your meeples around, who you're going to attack, all of that kind of stuff. Also, this game has really nice component quality, which is great. The tiles for the island are beautiful. The little sea serpents and the sharks and the whales are fantastic. I really like them. One complaint, the meeples in this version are made of plastic, which is too bad. However, one negative for this game is kind of tied into what I said earlier about those numbers on the bottom of the meeples. If you've got a really good memory, you're going to have a leg up on everybody else at the table. And the people who don't have such a great time remembering stuff, it's going to make them pretty frustrated because that is a major part of this game.
Speaking of people getting frustrated, something that really has to be said about this game is that it's very confrontational, very directly competitive. You're not just blocking somebody else's action or preventing them from doing what they want. You're using a sea serpent or a shark to eat their little meeples and kick them off the board. Very confrontational, and some people think that's a lot of fun. Some gaming groups really don't want that kind of dynamic at the table because they know that it doesn't end so well. That being said, if you've got a group that can deal well with those confrontational dynamics, this is a really great filler and family game. It moves really quickly, there's really not a lot of downtime, and it's really simple and quick to both play and learn. So it's something that you can really introduce to gaming groups that aren't really into more complex strategy games or don't have a lot of time on their hands. A last really neat pro about Survive is that it's pretty much entirely language independent. As long as somebody can explain the rules to you, everything that you're actually doing in the game doesn't require any reading, so this is a game that could work well for international groups or groups where one player has a lower reading level or a weaker grasp of English, which is really neat and not that common.